Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we are checking out some day one decks for tonight's new card, Ravonna Renslayer. Ravonna is a 3-cost, 3-power that reads ongoing. Your cards with 1 or less power cost 1 less, minimum 1. So, this card I think is actually decently powerful, and I think it's kind of being a little bit underrated, mainly due to the fact that the other 2 cards releasing this season, outside of the season pass, are overshadowing it in terms of power, being Alioth and the final week card, Mobius. So I think both those cards are very strong, and because they're very strong, they're making Ravonna not seem as flashy or powerful by comparison, especially when a lot of people are predicting that Mobius is going to become such a large part of the meta to help counteract all the cost reduction Loki enables, that Ravonna is going to be kind of caught in the collateral damage that Mobius being a omnipresent threat is going to create. So overall, I think this is a pretty decent card, and I actually think it is underrated because cost reduction is really strong in card games. If you can build your deck around this card effectively, you're essentially getting an effect similar to what we see on Sarah if you have enough of your cards that meet her condition. And you can get her out as early as turn 3, so a lot more time to actually make use of that mana cheating. However, unlike Sarah, this isn't a blanket reduction. This only applies to a certain subset of cards, so definitely requires a bigger focus on deck building, but I think cards like that are always interesting. Now, Ravonna is a Series 4 card, so a little bit better on the accessibility spectrum, though if you're strapped on tokens, I do think saving your tokens to buy Mobius is probably the smarter move if you can only have one. But if you do have some tokens saved up and the effect seems interesting to you, I don't think this is really a bad buy for 3k tokens. Just be aware that next week there might be a lot of stuff out there trying to counter her because of Mobius. So generally with the Spotlight caches, if you can get a card in Series 4 for 3k tokens, and the other cards in the week aren't particularly appealing, I think going with tokens is the better route. I don't think this is the worst Spotlight week. We have Zabu and Jean Grey as our other featured cards here. Really like the Zabu variant, not too big on the Jean one. In terms of playability, Zabu's actually been falling in terms of play rate, not because it's a bad card or anything, just because the meta has kind of shifted in a way where Zabu decks aren't the dominant force they once were, and I think also people are fearing Mobius is going to continue to hammer down the Zabu decks a bit. And then Jean Grey, definitely kind of a niche card. It's a card I like a lot. However, it's a card like Ravonna that really encourages specific deck building around it in order to maximize her effect, as otherwise you are subject to it as well, and that can be a downside if you don't build your deck correctly. She hasn't seen a ton of play in a lot of decks, mainly a Thanos control style deck and one of the versions of the Wave Move deck going around, but outside of that, really haven't seen too much from Jean. So overall, Spotlight Week, I think this is going to be a pass. I really don't think the value is here unless you actually really want all 3 of these cards. So yeah, that's what I think about Ravonna. Let's dive on into our day 1 decks for her. So starting things off, we have a Cerebro 3 deck. Now, one card I'm a little bit conflicted on that I didn't include in this list, but you could consider is Bast. Bast is often pretty nice, being able to buff up your Cerebro, your Mystique, and your Iron Man to 3 power, especially handy on Iron Man, but also just getting those other 0 power cards, or even your Luke Cage to 3 power can be kind of nice because then they get the Cerebro boost. I opted not to do that for this specific build, mainly because if we're basting early on, Ravonna ends up not really doing very much. But maybe it is worth it long term. Also has some anti-synergy with our Shadow King, but Luke Cage can get around that if necessary. But yeah, C3 has been a deck a lot of people have been playing, trying out different versions of. This is one I like quite a bit. I think Snowguard's actually a pretty good addition to it, giving you more cheap 2-drops that are 3 power and can have potentially impactful effects is really nice. Luke Cage, mainstay of Cerebro decks, turning off those really annoying locations, or if opponent happens to be playing a deck with Hazmat or some of the high Evo cards that can mess with our Cerebro. Invisible Woman is nice for either hiding away our Shadow King or Valkyrie early on in the game, or even Killmonger in some instances, and it also can protect us from Enchantress, which is really valuable when a lot of our overall power is coming from our cards like Cerebro, Mystique, and Iron Man. Then some more flexible 2-drops here in Jeff and Sentinel. I think Sentinel's always been really great in Cerebro 3, keeps your hand nice and full, and lets you keep playing out 3-cost things across the board. Killmonger, another bit of tech here, helping us with the high evolutionary matchup, and just against those pesky 1-drops that a lot of the ramp decks seem to be running, like Nebula. Obviously, Ravonna here is mainly going to be activating our Cerebro, our Mystique, and our Iron Man, but she does enable some pretty nutty things here. If we get the cards in hand, we can curve out Ravonna into Iron Man and then copy with Mystique and Cerebro on the following turn. So really just frees up a bit of our mana so we can play more of our cards that are going to get that Cerebro boost, or double up on our Iron Man before the end of the game. And then Valk is really nice in terms of just being able to swing a lane. She is a little bit more expensive though in terms of cost. You could consider Shang-Chi in that place as well, but I do think the added flexibility of Valkyrie for things like buffing up our Iron Man or Cerebro or Mystique is also a really nice bonus. Then we have a Silver Surfer deck. So it's not a 3-drop if we do not have a Surfer deck for it, and in this case we're slotting it into the Brood Absorbing Man Silver Surfer deck. This is a deck that has kind of fallen off in popularity, but I think is still a pretty alright deck overall, and it has a lot of targets for Ravonna to make use of here. So the things that she's going to be reducing our cost on here are things like Ironheart, Mystique, Patriot, Wolfsbane, and Iron Man. And I guess even Wasp, if your Wasp happens to cost a little bit of extra mana due to an unfortunate Iceman. But yeah, generally pretty straightforward deck. We're trying to get the nut draw here of going Forge into Brood, copy it with Absorbing Man, have a bunch of big broodlings across the board, and then buff them up with our other cards such as Patriot, Silver Surfer, or Iron Man. We have some nice hits off of Iron Lad here. Lad onto Brood is always very nice. Copying any of our good ongoings isn't bad as well, and just in general is a decent body for the cost. We have Wasp as just another way to get a Patriot activation here. Mr. Sinister is another card you could consider in this deck, but I think our board fills up so quickly. If we do have the Brood game plan online, it's not necessarily that needed, in my opinion. And then Wolfsbane is a little bit of a different include from normal builds, but the idea with this is, well, if we're going to be filling up our lanes pretty quickly anyway with the Brood stuff, might as well play a reduced cost Wolfsbane, get a nice buff on her, and then have another target for our Surfer on the final turn of the game. Ravonna also enables us finding room for Mystique here, who is able to copy our powerful ongoing effects such as Patriot or Iron Man, which can definitely help close out a lane. And we have Ironheart as just another decent 3-drop here that spreads power around the board while benefiting from Ravonna's effect. Next up we have a On Reveal deck. So this is an archetype I think a lot of people don't really think a ton about, but I've been playing a bit of it recently, been quite a lot of fun, and something that Ravonna slots decently into as just a good tempo 3-drop that can enable mana cost cheating later on in the game. So we have a lot of good on reveal cards here. Snowguard was actually a really big buff to this deck, as you want mostly big targets to be cheating out with this Jubilee, but you also need stuff to play in the early game in order to get value out of your things like Ironheart or Wolfsbane. So Snowguard really nice for filling out our curve, giving us a 1-drop that guarantees curve into 2-drop, so very, very nice addition to the deck. Iceman to disrupt the opponent's tempo a bit. Jeff for some added flexibility. He's just one of the best 2-drops. Ironheart and Wolfsbane are two of our cards that are going to be benefiting from the Ravonna Renslayer cost reduction, as are Jubilee and White Tiger. White Tiger has actually been very powerful for me, and the card that's winning a lot of these games. Just going like Wong into White Tiger into Odin can be really strong, and Ravonna is going to enable being able to play White Tiger on the final turn, potentially in a Wong lane, alongside another strong on reveal card like Ironheart or Wolfsbane. Gamora just gives us a little bit of a backup plan in terms of something to do on turn 5 and helps us take down a lane on her own, which is always nice. Jubilee has really good high roll here in terms of cheating out Odin, or just one of our big 4 or 5 drops, but even if she pulls something a little bit smaller here, maybe it's not so bad if we're only paying 3 cost for her. It's definitely an archetype that I think is a little bit underrated, so if you miss the days of old, the early collection levels when you played a bunch of on reveal, definitely suggest checking this one out. Then we have No Zabu Darkhawk. So this is kind of cool, and I think one of the things the developers are trying to push a bit when they decided to make Rockslide a 3-cost card. So we actually are able to run a Darkhawk deck that doesn't really feel like it needs Zabu to be effective. We actually have a pretty decent curve out here. Snow Guard, again, just a really decent early game card that helps guarantee us a curve. Corrigan Rock Slide to pump up our Hawk. Shadow King as our kind of anti-big stuff tech card, since a lot of the stuff going big right now is often getting buffed up throughout the course of the game, like Kitty or Angela or Collector. Mystique is really nice here, as not only can we play her for cheap with Ravonna, but she has two very valuable targets here in Darkhawk and Iron Man, and sometimes there are even situations where being able to copy a Cosmo in another lane to catch the opponent off guard can be really backbreaking. So the main cards Ravonna is going to be reducing here are our Hawk, Iron Man, and Mystique, but I think that's more than enough here. Is often going to be enough to close out the game. Lad has a bunch of good targets here, best ones being, of course, Darkhawk, Iron Man, or Dr. Doom, who acts as our other late game closer and gives us a little bit more game into the wave decks going around. I think if you've been missing Darkhawk and want something a little bit different to it that doesn't really rely as heavily on Zabu, this will be a really fun one to try out. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Negative. So obviously Ravonna doesn't really benefit herself from Mr. Negative, but she does kind of benefit in terms of giving us a decent backup plan with a negative style deck, where you're not going to draw Mr. Negative every game, so being able to reduce the cost on a lot of the cards here that already naturally slot into a Mr. Negative style deck might bring a bit more consistency to this archetype. I've been a big fan of the Black Panther Zola package in Negative as well, because it does enable you to have a decent win condition in the games where you don't find Negative, or in this case Ravonna as well. You're just not always going to get your pieces when you need them, so sometimes being able to just slam two 16 power Panthers in 2 lanes is enough to close out the game, and they can get even bigger if we happen to draw Wong beforehand. This deck definitely has a ton of things that benefit from our Ravonna cost reduction, which is really nice. In fact, the only cards that don't benefit from Ravonna here are Zabu and Black Panther, who don't really need that cost reduction anyway. So if you've been missing the Mr. Negative style archetype but want a little bit different of a way to try it out, I think this is a pretty neat way to do it that makes use of Ravonna. And there we have it. That is going to wrap it up for our day 1 Ravonna Renslayer decks. Let me know what you think about this card in the comments below. Are you a believer in Ravonna? Are you going to pick her up? Or are you saving those tokens for Mobius next week and are afraid she really might not reach her true potential because of all the limiting he's going to do on cost reduction? Love to hear it. Let me know in the comments below, but that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.